Hello, this is Jamie Lammers getting back to you again. This time I'm doing part three, which I figured I wanted to focus on things that would be beneficial to you. There is still a lot more to learn about gender diversity, but I figured that I would get down to some things that you would feel would be very helpful for you out in the field. So I'm going to focus on the legalities in Wisconsin of the gender diverse. It's kind of a look of the variations regarding legal identification of the gender diverse. Maybe you know this stuff already, but most people don't know all the ins and outs. So let's get started. Things that I'm planning on talking about today that would be legal name changes, names in terms of identification, such as driver's license and that, differentiation of gender terms related to the legalities, legal gender changes, gender markers on identifications, and gender segregated areas. So if you're wondering where some of the information comes from, or if you're wanting to direct somebody to getting legal help in regards to gender and name, there is a group called Trans Law Help Wisconsin at www.translawhelp.com that have outlined how to do this step by step and things that are legalities and that in terms of protections and discrimination, stuff like that. So it's a very helpful website. So starting out, the idea of legal name changes. So for most people who are gender diverse, they do want to change their name just because they feel like their name is dysphoric. It usually doesn't fit the gender that they actually are. And so they often will go for a name change. Some of them will do what I have done, at least up to now, which is formally go by a different name, but legally I still have not changed my name. So even though I'm Jamie Lammers formally, my identification cards still say James Lammers. If I wanted to get my name legally changed, I would have to complete court forms. I would have to run it in a newspaper for 3 weeks announcing the name change. I would have to get a court date then, at which point anybody who would like to voice complaints about my name change could occur. If you come across any family or friends or workers or something that are voicing distress of someone's legal name change, just point out that they should watch the newspaper for when the court date is so that they can go to the court date to voice those complaints if they want to. And then once you get the court date, then comes a bunch of tedious work of changing the name on all agency records. So somebody can have a legal name change and not have documents actually showing the legal name change. That's the interesting thing, because first we have to deal with Social Security, which takes a while. Because you only can do the mail-in variation. And then you have to deal with the birth certificate, which usually doesn't take too long, but still. And at that point, you can start going and getting things like driver's license changed and everything else changed, which means there's a time window at the very least that someone will have a legal name change, but their documents will not express that. It'll take a while for that to catch up. Which goes on to this. This is why, one of the reasons why I wanted to let you know. So if you get someone's driver's license or something, it may have a name on it that they say is not their legal name. Now, is it a legal name? Is it their chosen name or affirmed name or formal name? These are all different variations of how you can say it. So you kind of have to check with them. Did it get court changed? If they're saying their name has been changed legally, you can ask if they have the court documentation. They're not required to carry it around, but a lot of us tend to do, just so that we can prove to people that our name has been legally changed, or a copy of the court document. Just because it tends to be a big pain in the butt trying to use IDs that don't actually fit our legal name. If you wish to challenge the name on an ID, my request of all of you is to do this away from others. This is something that can be an embarrassment. This can be something that is not known of others. This is called outing someone, when you actually bring up their what we talked about before as dead name. We don't want to out somebody, so I ask that you make sure others can't overhear when you ask them about their name change on the ID, why it doesn't fit, and things like that. That way, the person will feel respected. Their privacy will not be challenged. And because the reason for the privacy is its safety. We want to make sure these people can stay safe, because there are people who wish them harm if they found out they were transgender or gender diverse. You can ask, of course, like I said before, the court document. See if they have it with them, because I know quite a few who tend to carry them with them. Now, there is differentiations when we're looking at gender in terms of the terms and the legalities connected to terms, because we do have the gender or sex assigned at birth. This is basically what the doctor gave us when we were born. Quite often, this is unchanging in a way because it's part of history. It's not true. It's not the legal term. It is not what we are. It's just somebody's opinion at the time of our birth, basically. And then there is the legal sex or gender, which is what legally they go by. This is, the court records and birth certificate and things like that, how those portray the sex or gender. Everything tends to stem off of the birth certificate. So when we get a legal gender change, we usually get the birth certificate changed. Then there's gender identity, of course, the identification of what the person's gender is, and then how they express themselves, the gender expression. You will, out and about, come across people who will use the terms of MTF and FTM. That's MTF is male to female. FTM is female to male. So an MTF transgender individual would be somebody who was assigned male at birth, but they have affirmed themselves as a female individual, and vice versa the other one. The ones below that are less often found, but they still are used sometimes and are a bit more confusing for people. MTNB is male to non-binary, and FTNB is female to non-binary. Same thing as above, but this time to a non-binary, third gender, agender type of gender identity. So this is outside that binary realm kind of thing. Now, looking at legal gender changes in Wisconsin, like I said before, our legal gender is based off of our birth certificate. So if we want to get our legal gender changed, we have to get our birth certificate changed. And we can only do this by going through the courts, of course. But the courts have there's a rule in the books that in Wisconsin that a person cannot get a legal gender change if they have the genitalia of the gender that was assigned at birth, exterior genitalia, actually. This is, again, those complicating things if we really want to get into it. But the person can get a petition to court for a legal gender change if they have had a gender-affirming genital surgery. Now, an orchiectomy or a hysterectomy do count. Hysterectomy is removal of the uterus. Orchiectomy is removal of the testicles. So these do count. So it's not like the person has a fully affirmed genitalia of the gender that they have, but they do have to at least get past the those, I guess you could say, primary, if you want to say primary parts. Once they have the surgeries, they can then petition to court. If the court signs off on the legal gender change, they can go to the birth certificate and get that changed. And once birth certificate's changed, they can change other documents. Now, driver's license is a bit different, and that's why we want to look at this one. And this is the one you most commonly deal with, so that's why I wanted to focus on this one very specifically. Needed, I say needed because there is not an official rule, regulation, or policy for this, but this tends to be what the DMV does. Needed for gender marker change to the driver's license is either the court document of a legal gender change, or they can get a letter from their physician certifying, in quotes, gender change. Using this letter, one of these two letters, you can get the M to F, FTM. In Wisconsin, we don't have an X or NB or anything like that, a third gender marker, but I would not doubt that at some point we will have one. The states are slowly adding them in various states. There's 19 states right now that have a third gender marker that can be on identification markers. So this means that their driver's license could reflect not their legal gender. That's because their birth certificate could be different from their driver's license due to either they're in the process of changing their gender or they have used a physician's letter to change their driver's license. The reason for this physician letter changing driver's license is due to safety. A lot of individuals have been assaulted, have been physically and sexually abused, have been stalked, have been accosted, whatever you want to word it, because people found out that they were a transgender person living in stealth. Stealth is basically when people don't know you're transgender. And the ID will give away that stealth mode, if you will, out the person. And then if people become upset about that, such as a significant other or or people in line behind the person, they will sometimes follow them out and challenge the person, which can lead to like physical aggression and sexual aggression and stuff like that. This happens more than you may think. So this is why we want these IDs changed and why we want to allow people to change their IDs if they have this official kind of lifestyle change, so that they aren't held, in a vulnerable state. Now, last thing I want to talk about a little bit is this gender segregated areas. Reason I want to talk about this because you could potentially be asked to weigh in on somebody in gender segregated areas who's gender diverse. And so I want to, kind of put this on your radar, how you would deal with this. Now, obviously, I'm just giving suggestions. It's really up to whatever your policy makers in your organization to put official rulings down that you would have to follow in a way. But these are just from my education experience and understanding, my suggestions. First off, we want to look at the idea that there are court rulings against restricting transgender individuals using gender-affirming segregated areas, especially in schools and in employment. There have been, it didn't get to the federal Supreme Court for the schools, but it has been won a couple times over now in the Wisconsin area, that students have to be allowed to use the gender-affirming bathrooms. And in employment, just last summer, the federal Supreme Court did make a ruling that the Title 7, the one where you can't discriminate against sex. Also, they ruled that sex includes gender identity, and so having someone kicked out of a gender-affirming segregated area, if they have the gender identity of a transgender person, then would be violating that discrimination based on sex. My suggestion would be, let them use what matches how they are expressing. This is why I talked about the gender expression at the beginning, because of this idea of if they are expressing femininity, allow them to use the women's restroom. If they're expressing masculinity, allows them men's. Now, for me, quite often I will kind of change which bathroom I use, because if I'm like in a dress and makeup and very prettied up, obviously going into the men's bathroom, I'm asking for trouble. I'm asking to cause people to be very, very, very uncomfortable, have people to challenge me and things like that. Usually I don't get challenged then in a women's restroom because I look very feminine. Vice versa, though, for if I'm dressed heavily masculine. That's basically kind of, it's been going more and more to the women's side, but this is what it is. So it's kind of one of those things where am I most safe? That's what most transgender people, that's what they're using as the deciding factor. Where can I safely use the bathroom? That's all they care about. Quick fun note that more U.S. senators have accosted people in bathrooms than transgender people have within the U.S. history. So when senators complain about transgender people accosting people in the bathrooms, I almost feel like that's the pot calling the kettle black. So, and now, actuality, there's only like 3 or 4 of people who are supposedly gender diverse. They weren't even expressing transgender status who use a bathroom that accosted someone. I don't know what the details are on those, but there's only a very small number, and they aren't even of transgender people. They are of gender diverse people who were not expressing that gender diversity. There have been none for transgender people that I am aware of, at least. If you really don't like that suggestion, though, I would go with what matches the person's identification. If you get their driver's license F, women's, M, men's, if you really want to. But that still leaves that gray area where somebody who, like me, my driver's license does express male. I've not legally changed my gender. I'm not even sure if I will bother. It's a big pain in the butt to do it. So even though I express feminine, even though I have a feminine body, even though I am a woman, I still have an M on my driver's license. So if you would go by that matches their ID, you would be kicking me out of the women's restroom, even if I'm wearing a cocktail dress, in which point, and you know, that would be putting me in danger in some ways. So that's the end of that slideshow. I do want to bring up this one idea, though, before we get going. And the idea is, even though I've gone over some of the basics that are things that you may need, I wanted to give to you what you feel like you need out in the field. But there is more to all this than all this. This is very, very, very 101. So I would ask that, since I have focused on what you need first and foremost, I would ask for a return. There is still a lot of discriminatory prejudice acts that all of us do. And I would almost guarantee that no matter how affirming you are, all of you do it. And to show you that, I still discriminate. And I am probably the most educated person within the county of Sheboygan. So there's still a lot that we have to learn to try and reduce all these discrimination and prejudice acts. So I asked to return the favor. I'm going to continue with this series to give you education that gets deeper into things, and it goes into areas that aren't as relevant to you, but this is so that you can become a better ally, a better advocate, become more affirming, and will help us in the long run. After all, you are models out in the community. So if you are doing the right thing, I would hope others would the same. Thank you.